We will start the, we are going to start the streaming, and we start with the event. Perfecto, ya está listo. Muy bien, vamos a empezar. Welcome to our event, to this webinar organized by the North America Central and National Autonomous University in collaboration with the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. We are collaborated also with the ITIF, the Institute of Technology, at Washington, D.C. So we are very interested to explain that during this discussion, we kindly request all participants to keep their cameras and microphones turned off to ensure a smooth experience for everyone. Okay, we will discuss this discussion related to building resilience against economic cyber-espionage experience from the USA, Mexico, and India. So get ready for an enriching and insightful discussion with our distinguished panelists. We will present our the director of the North America Center, Dr. Graciela Martinez-Zalce. There will get up to us words of welcome to start this event. Please, Dr. Graciela, it will be a pleasure to have you here.
Buenas tardes. Thank you very much for joining us y muchas gracias por haberme invitado, doctor, a que los acompañe. Thank you for inviting me to give some small introduction to this very interesting webinar. Intellectual property protection has long been a key pillar for fostering economic growth and stimulating healthy competition among businesses. In this context, the study entitled Building Resilience Against Cyber-Enabled IP Theft, which will be discussed this evening in this webinar, takes on significant importance in shedding light on the threat that cyber IP theft poses to emerging economies and how they can strengthen their defenses. The study highlights how, despite advances in IP protection, many companies remain vulnerable to theft of their intellectual assets. In particular, cases of industrial and commercial espionage have proven costly in both economic and intellectual property terms. With the rise of knowledge-intensive sectors in emerging economies, vulnerability to these threats has become even more apparent. A key point the study emphasizes is the threat of the state-sponsored economic espionage, specifically through cyber IP theft. While advanced economies have historically been top targets, there is growing evidence that economies in the global south are also at risk. The Australian Strategic Policy Institute, ASPI, through its Awareness and Empowerment Project, seeks to address this worrying situation. The initiative aims to raise awareness of state-sponsored cyber IP theft and empower emerging economies to defend against this threat. At the core of this project is the development of an analysis framework that assesses a country's vulnerability and resilience to state-sponsored cyber IP theft. The framework is composed of three interrelated categories: the state and the knowledge economy, operational and technical capacities, and external cooperation. These categories range from the size and growth of the knowledge economy to the robustness of IP protection and cybersecurity measures, as well as international collaboration in the fight against such threats. The conceptual basis of the framework lies in the premise that economies with rapid knowledge growth are more vulnerable to IP theft. However, their resilience is strengthened if they have an enabling environment for IP protection and cybersecurity. This approach is particularly relevant for emerging economies, which often experience a rapid increase in innovation and knowledge. The results of studies conducted under this framework provide an in-depth analysis of an economy's vulnerability and resilience to cyber IP theft. The researchers in charge of this analysis assess both the strengths and weaknesses of the national IP system and the cybersecurity capabilities of the country in question. In addition, they are urged to provide concrete recommendations on key areas for capacity building should the country decide to actively address cyber IP theft. In conclusion, the study Building Resilience Against Cyber-Enabled IP Theft offers a comprehensive perspective on the threat of state-sponsored cyber IP theft in emerging economies. It highlights the need to strengthen IP protection and cybersecurity measures, as well as the importance of international collaboration. The analysis framework developed by ASPI provides a valuable tool to assess and improve the resilience of these economies to this threat, with a view to a future secure innovation and sustainable development. I assure all the people who are joining us today that we will learn a lot with the papers our three speakers will give. And thank you very much for inviting me once more, Dr. Aguilar.
Thank you, Dr. Graciela, for your words of welcome. It's very interesting to have these debates in the North America Center. I'm very, very proud that we organize this webinar with ASPI and with the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. And right now, we started with an introduction related with the methodology of this study that is created by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. In this case, our speaker, it will be URMIKA. URMIKA is a researcher at this institution at ASPI, and she will explain in details the different indicators and the dimension related with this methodology to analyze the protection of IP from cyberspace in this study. Please, URMIKA, it's a pleasure to have you here, and we are attentive of you.
Hello, thank you so much. Thank you, Director Graciela, for the very nice introduction to the project. I hope I don't repeat your words. I would actually start with first sharing my screen so that you have something to see. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
We see your screen.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So firstly, I'll just start with what ASPI is. I'm a researcher at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, or ASPI. So what is it that we are and what is it that we do? So we are an independent and non-partisan think tank that was established by the Australian government in 2001 with the aim of providing advice and policy recommendations on matters pertaining to national security. And this is done through various means, through research products, through dialogues and workshops, as well as capacity building initiatives. Since 2010, we've also been offering policy recommendations on matters pertaining to cybersecurity, and our products range from information operations all the way to, again, capacity building. So I hope I don't repeat, but I want to give a brief introduction and background to what this project is. Why are we here today discussing the vulnerability and resilience of countries against this very unique cyber threat? So more than methodology, I think what is important is to set the context as to why we are here discussing what we are discussing. So as you can see, states have become more active users of cyber tools as a means to conduct malicious activities over the years. As we can see from the graph, between 2009 and 2022, the number of cyber-espionage operations have increased at a dramatic pace. Moreover, private entities such as companies and research organizations are being increasingly targeted by hacker groups to steal IP for commercial gain. And these hacker groups, more often than not, are suspected to be state-sponsored. In fact, in 2015, President Barack Obama and Xi Jinping had an agreement around the same issue, where they agreed that neither country's government would conduct or knowingly support cyber-enabled theft of intellectual property with the intent of providing competitive advantages to companies or commercial sectors. In the same year, G20 member nations also adopted this as a norm. And in the following year, we have our G7 member nations who endorsed this. However, even though what we can see that there was some sort of agreement to not conduct or support ICT-enabled theft of intellectual property, as we can see from the graph over here, out of all the 300 cyber intrusions that took place since 2009, 229 of them targeting private entities have actually taken place since 2016. So what happens is, moreover, as economies digitalize and have adopted rapid digitalization in their business sectors, developing economies are being increasingly targeted. This is because even though they have incorporated digital tools, they do not have appropriate security measures installed. So hacker groups find it easier to target a company that is located in a developing economy to access their system and steal data of commercial value. So this is basically the background of our project and why we at ASPI have undertaken this capacity building initiative, where we want to raise awareness and build resilience in emerging economies against this threat. Out of the several products that we worked on and are still working on, one of them is this resilience and vulnerability framework that we'll be discussing in detail today. Besides that, we also have our perspective pieces, which even Nigel himself has written one on the US perspective on IP theft, which he'll be sharing. And besides that, we also have our podcast series and economic sector analysis. So I wouldn't go too much into what the indicators are and how we've analyzed, but broadly, this is our framework where we look at three categories: the state and the knowledge economy, operational technical capacities, and third is foreign cooperation. So under state and knowledge economy, we will look at different indicators. For instance, it could be knowledge intensive employment, it could be the percentage of internet penetration, the growth in gross secondary and tertiary enrollment, which gives us an idea of if an economy is a fully developed knowledge economy, or is it a growing knowledge economy or upcoming knowledge economy. When we look at operational technical capacities, we look at indicators which involve cybersecurity and IP enforcement, governance, awareness amongst institutions and industry. Also, when we look at diplomacy. Sorry, I was just forgetting that one. We also look at diplomacy when we look at operational and technical capacities to assess what is the maturity level of these emerging economies that we are studying. And third, when we look at foreign cooperation, we basically look at political and security ties alongside economic and scientific cooperation, which is an indication of whether an economy has deepening supply chain linkages or just basic international linkages with other nations. So this is broadly a framework. And just for background, I'm sure everybody knows what intellectual property is, but I would just like to redefine before we actually get into it and keep repeating that words every now and then during our discussion. So by intellectual property, we mean that items that are the property of mind or proprietary knowledge. Basically, it includes patents, trademarks, copyrights, industrial designs, as well as sensitive business information and trade secrets. And what do we mean by economic cyber espionage? We mean it refers to the unauthorized collection of commercially valuable assets through compromises of digital systems and communication channels, that is by cyber channels, by one state against another, or by one state against a private entity. So this is what we are looking at today by what we mean as cyber espionage, and where do countries, emerging economies, particularly in global South, as well as in Latin America, stand when it comes to their vulnerability and resilience framework. So with that, I think this was me providing a bit of context, and I will just throw it back to you, Juan Manuel, to carry on the conversation.
Thank you, URMIKA, for explaining the methodology of the ASPI study. It's very, very interesting to explain that the interest of make this study in region like South Asia or, for example, Latin America, but we have experience with another development countries like United States. And in this case, related with our nation that is considered important nation related to the emerging technologies like United States, we have our next panelist, that is NIGEL CORY. NIGEL CORY is Associate Director in the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. And NIGEL, it's a pleasure to have you here. It's very, very interesting that you could explain this result related with this methodology in the case of the United States, related to IP issues. But you are welcome to start your presentation, and we're very interested to hear you.
Thanks, Juan Manuel. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. As Juan Manuel mentioned, my name is NIGEL CORY. I'm Australian, but I work at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, ITIF, which is a non-profit, non-partisan think tank based in Washington, DC, where I cover all manner of high-tech trade and digital and cyber issues, a lot of which relates to China. One reason I was particularly pleased to contribute to this ASPI project on cyber-espionage of intellectual property is that I think it pays attention to it in a way that many policymakers have sort of moved on from in previous years. It doesn't get a lot of attention at the large multilateral forums like the World Trade Organization or the World Intellectual Property Organization, which, to be frank, are largely stuck in a debate around intellectual property from 20 years ago and aren't sort of well equipped to focus on these sort of more contemporary intellectual property issues. And we often, I think this debate about cyber espionage of IP often sort of forgets the fact that it's actually was one of the precursor issues in the current US-China trade and technology conflict, and that it was large and significant and continuing, and yet has been largely unresolved. And so I'm really glad that ASPI is doing this project and also focusing on it in a way to raise its awareness amongst other countries, because one factor that we see in US enforcement of cases against cyber theft and improving of laws and regulations around the issue is that quite often these attackers shift to softer targets in other countries. And so what they will inevitably do is they'll simply go to the second or third sort of most sophisticated company working on a particular piece of technology and start targeting their systems. And so this is why, I mean, if a firm is connected to the internet and it's involved in intellectual property that is advanced and cutting edge and the top of its market, it will nearly inevitably find itself the target of cyber espionage. But moving back specifically to the US context, as I mentioned, US firms remained under persistent threat from highly sophisticated, state-supported, insider-enabled efforts to steal their IP, especially from China. China has a massive, sophisticated hacking program that is bigger than every other nation combined. And the fact that it's state-supported in China means it's far more malicious compared to traditional commercial espionage, which may be more incidental or related to specific firms. In China, it is a sort of industrial level type situation. And so the cyber theft of IP has only grown with importance as the scale and persistence of the threat has been made clear, and as the techno-trade conflict with China, but as also with Russia, has escalated. And what it shows is that IP is critical to every country, especially the US, which is a world leader in many advanced technologies, but it's essentially critical to every firm that's involved in advanced technology because it's critical to competitive advantage, to seizing market share, to being successful in today's market. And so IP is only growing more important, and it's become more intangible and thus more susceptible to cyber theft. The US has long been a supporter of strong intellectual property rules and strong enforcement, which has led to its position as a world-leading sort of provider in many advanced technologies, a world leader in the internet. And this is both contemporary and historical. the founders of the United States deemed intellectual property so important that they provided Congress implementation powers for IP protections in the Constitution. So that just gives you an idea of just how central IP has been to the United States, going back to its founding. But obviously, as the nature of competition and trade has become ever more knowledge-driven and innovation-driven, IP has become ever more central and thus become the focal point for both legitimate competition and innovation, but also illegitimate theft. And this is because IP is fundamentally changed, become far more intangible and obviously digitalized, and thus susceptible to theft. So, for example, take source code, which is the coded instructions at the heart of a computer program. Source code enables computer technologies like algorithms to do the amazing things that they do. And for companies developing software, protecting source code is necessary to prevent other entities from stealing and free riding on the huge amounts of R&D spending and the time and effort they put into developing software. And so software is the intellectual property at the heart of many modern digital innovations, but because it's digital, it can be easily copied, transferred, and replicated. And so this is why sort of IP laws and regulations and enforcement needs to keep up with the current nature of the threat, because otherwise, especially state-supported actors like China will take advantage of those gaps and take advantage of those weaknesses to seize the IP that will help their own firms and help their own industries and their own economy if the US doesn't step up and provide better protections. And so what we've seen over the last, especially 15 years, is that the US's approach to intellectual property has evolved. And that this is, again, also indicative of the US's long-standing support for IP, is that what you see over the last 50 years is this continual updating and changing of US IP laws. For example, most recently, this led to the Defend Trade Secrets Act of 2016. And so that which was in part enacted as one part of a response to the type of cyber theft of IP that the US was seeing from China. It's also dedicated growing attention and resources to stronger enforcement at the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which has the lead for trying to identify and respond and prosecute these growing number of cases. And so this is obviously why we saw IP feature in the G20 with former President Obama in 2015, and in the phase 1 trade deal in the Trump administration. However, both of these efforts to try and address this issue have essentially failed. And so there remains ongoing interest in the United States out of how to improve protections against cyber theft and how to improve enforcement actions against these types of activities. And this is also leading the US to work with like-minded countries to do more both individually and together on IP because they recognize this is a collective problem. This requires a collective response. And so, as I'll detail later, like the US is working with other like-minded countries to develop a more coherent and coordinated response. And so, as it relates specifically to China, what we saw, just to give you a sense of how the situation has changed over time and how that is then prompted a response from the US, is that during the early 2000s, US policymakers largely ignored China's predatory economic policies, including cyber theft, because the government and the business community largely prioritized other issues in the bilateral relationship, especially after China had just acceded to the World Trade Organization. And while cyber theft was relatively common knowledge amongst US firms, they remained quiet because there was simply just too much money at stake in the Chinese market. And then in some instances, firms actually wanted the US government not to take action because they feared that China would retaliate against them and thus threaten their sort of market access there. But over time, what they saw was that this was not incidental theft. This was large-scale theft that fundamentally undermined their competitive position and essentially their existence over the longer term. And so over time, they started engaging the Obama administration to take action. And so this is why in the second term, the Obama administration stepped up and tried to do more in relation to Chinese state-sponsored cyber theft of IP with the G20 agreement. And while one estimate is that the agreement may have saved the US as much as $15 billion, this was short-lived. And so it basically reverted back to where it was. And this led to the Trump administration citing IP and forced technology transfers essentially as the basis for the trade war of China, and that, which obviously itself has also fallen short. And so now we're in this position where there is not much of any engagement between the two sides, and it's largely a defensive mechanism from the US to try and do more on its own to counter the threat. But what we've seen since then is that the tempo of cyber threats has stayed very high. For example, in a January 2022 speech, FBI Director Christopher Wray stated that threats from China's government are, quote, more brazen and more damaging than ever before, and that the Chinese government steals staggering volumes of information. In 2021, the Department of Justice stated that about 80% of all economic espionage cases involve the Chinese government. And so that's just a staggering figure and just gives you an idea of just how persistent and large this problem is. And so basically, China has proven that it's not willing to change its way. And so it's up to the United States and other like-minded countries to enact defensive and retaliatory measures to counter what China is doing. And so as to the question of whether existing responses have made the US resilient to the threat of economic espionage, it's a mixed result and it's a work in progress. Scrutiny and action against China are evolving and growing. For example, in 2021, President Biden coordinated a collective response with allies to accuse China of a major cyber-espionage campaign. Also in October 2021, the Biden administration organized a discussion with 30 countries on efforts to combat the growing threat of ransomware and other cybercrime, which relates to cyber-enabled IP theft. And so this just gives you an idea of that there's more to be done. The US has also enacted changes to the sharing of information between the private sector and the government on cyber theft of IP. But obviously more can be done here because many firms still don't report what's happening to them. I think there's an FBI estimate that only a quarter of cyber incidents are actually reported to the FBI. And many firms don't report information to the government for many reasons, including the risk of potential litigation, the fear of retaliation in foreign courts, and the simple fact that they don't trust the US government with some of this information. So there's still more to be done there. The US could also update its laws in some regards. We strongly supported the Secrets Act of 2021, which would create a powerful new legal tool that firms could use to identify, deter, and punish state-backed IP theft and prevent the imports of products that benefit from that cyber threat. Anyhow, but as to at the moment, scrutiny and action is increasingly likely and also necessary. The head of the new House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, Congressman Mike Gallagher, wrote a few months ago to the Department of Justice about Chinese IP theft. And only earlier this year, the US Department of Justice created a new litigating section in its National Security Division to increase its ability to disrupt and prosecute nation-state threat actors and state-sponsored cyber criminals. And so, along these same lines, the FBI requested an additional $106 million for its 2023 budget to address a range of cybersecurity issues, including investigations relating to state-sponsored cyber theft of IP. So with that, I hope I've given a bit of an overview of how the United States, which is perhaps the central player in this battle over cyber-enabled IP theft, has responded over the last 20 years, and how this response continues to evolve, and that there's still so much more to do given the scale of the problem and what's at stake in terms of the technology that is being targeted by this. But also to highlight how the United States increasingly needs to work with like-minded countries on this issue. And so I think that's another good reason, a good thing from this ASPI report to hopefully highlight to policymakers in other countries that they too will inevitably find themselves on the receiving end of these type of cyber attacks and cyber theft activities, and thus needs to figure out and look at other countries, whether it's the United States, Australia, or elsewhere, about what are they doing and how could we adapt and use what they're doing. And so I think that's a really valuable thing that ASPI's work on this issue will provide. And with that, I want to thank you again for the invitation to speak today, and I look forward to any questions you might have.
Thank you, Nigel, for your comments. It's very interesting because we are living in a context that the struggle for the leadership in the international community and international relations, it's determined by emerging technologies as cybersecurity, as the part of EA, as the part of quantum computing. And in this struggle, we saw that the two opponents in the global context is United States and China. And China have a very strategic vision that it truth like this dimension, like EA, IP, cybersecurity, quantum computing, it will be achieved a strategic dimension to be an opponent from the United States. A very, very interesting is that the United States have the more holistic cybersecurity strategic cybersecurity policy in the whole world. It's very interesting to see that the United States have cybersecurity policy related, for example, to workforce dimension, for example, to 5G networks development, for example, it also related to cybercrime. And in this case, that this is very related with IP protection is very interesting because it's a fact that the United States is a common target from the Chinese cyber attacks. And very, very interesting how it can to stop these activities related with building capabilities in the country. So I continue with the event, and I will explain the results related with Mexico profile with this study and this methodology related with ASPI. I will present little slides related with this. I want to use my time in the best terms. I hope don't use more time that I need to use. And we started with this assessment related with Mexico vulnerability and resilience. As URMIKA explained us, the index of ASPI, it's split in three categories: the state and the knowledge economy, operational and forming capacities, and foreign cooperation. Each dimension have different indicators. For example, in the first we have skill and infrastructures with 4 dimensions. Indicator 2 is strategy, state strategy with 2 dimensions, knowledge production with 5 subdivision. In the second category, operational and informing capacities, we have an indicator of political environment. In indicator 5, we have intellectual property governance and enforcement with 5 subdivision. Indicator 6, cybersecurity with 5 subdivision. And in category D, we have foreign cooperation with 2 indicators: foreign relation with China and foreign relation with the OECD member states with 2 subdivisions. We see in a quick way the different results for Mexico, and we analyze, for example, in the category 1, the state and the knowledge economy in the first dimension, that it's related with skill and labor for secondary, skill and labor for tertiary, knowledge intensive employment, and internet presentation. We achieve the next results. For example, related with skilled labor, skilled labor force that it's related with secondary school. For example, we see in the conclusion that 18 and 19 of the population completed. With this, it's related that Mexico have a score of 9 of a total of 10. In the next dimension, we can analyze the part of the tertiary school. And for example, the conclusion is that Mexico had that 49 of the population completed. Is this indicator, it's more harder for Mexico. We have a score of 5 points of a total of 10. For example, when we analyze the knowledge of intensive employment, the conclusion is that Mexico has a population of 20 and 29 population it's employment in knowledge and intensive sectors. We have, in this case, we have a worse score related with this dimension. We have 3 of 10. In other case, we can analyze internet penetration that is related with some aspect like the digital breach. We conclusion that the population have 17 or 79 of people have access to internet. We achieve in this case a score of 10 in this case of the dimension. Related to the indicator 2, that it's related to state strategy, we can analyze a government strategy and policy support. In this case, with subdivision, for example, the government strategy goal is examines the priority that the state accords to the development of the knowledge economy. The conclusion of this dimension is that Mexico has a dedicated policy document explicitly focused on the development of the knowledge economy. For example, we have a national science and technology law. We have institutions related with this issue, like the National Council of Science and Technology, named as CONACYT in Mexico. For example, we have a national system of research that encourages the scientific research. For this reason, in this dimension, we achieve a score of 7 of 10. In the next case, we can analyze, for example, related to policy support. The goal of this indicator is check policy initiative for commercial entities and research to innovative. This is related with the story of Mexico, of the development of the North American Free Trade Agreement, the NAFTA. And with this case, we started a policy related with the innovation and to promote these issues in the country. The conclusion of this sub-indicator is that Mexico has some strong support for foreign and domestic research institute. And we achieved a score at 9 points of a total of 10. The next dimension, it's related with knowledge production. Is that their indicator at the have this subdivision: IP registration, IP intensive sectors, joint ventures and strategic alliance, research and development funding, and the digital economy. What can see in these cases? For example, when we talk about intellectual property resistance, ASPI perspective have that's the goal of the sub-indicator is to examine the sum of growth of IP registration, for example, like patents, trademark, copyright, and trade secrets, and they associate to high productivity in the country. In Mexico, we are ranking in the 518 among 132 leading economies in 2022 by the Global Innovation Index. And for example, we have some strengths. We have a market sophistication and knowledge and technology outputs and human capital research. In our weakness, we have a business sophistication, political and operational stability that sometimes it could be compromised with the governance of the country and the violence that suffer our nation. For example, we have institutional relation to the protection of intellectual property, like is the Mexican Institute of Intellectual Property, that is the INPI. And the conclusion is that the country has thousands of IP registration in the past 10 years and has a steady growth. With this reason, we achieved a score of 8 points of a total of 10. In the next way, when we talk about IP-intensive industry, the goal of this sub-indicator is measure the size of the country IP-intensive industries as a proportion of the country's GDP. According to the European Union, IP-intensive industry are those companies register more international property rights per 1,000 employees. We see that here we have, the finding of the studies, we have industry with intensive and intellectual property rights contribute around the 48 of total economic production according to the INPI. For example, we have greatest contribution of the growth development product with trademark intensive industry, with patent intensive industry, and with design intensive industry. The conclusion is that we achieve a score of 40 and 49 of field are IP intensive, and we have a score of 5 of a total of 10. Joint venture and strategic alliance, this sub-indicator is related with scrutinize the size of the growth of cooperative arrangement between entities that aim to achieve a mutual benefit project in USD, mainly private firm in Mexico. The findings related with these sub-indicators, according to the Federal Economic Competition Commission, COFECE, during 2013 and 2017, there were 531 operation with companies, including acquisition, merger, or a strategic alliance. We have a foreign investment law that's very important to measure this dimension. It is foreign investment law says that there are some activities exclusive to the Mexican government, such as extraction and exploration of hydrocarbons, planning and control of the electric energy system. Conclusion, Mexico has few joint venture strategic islands involving domestic and international field, mainly in IP-intensive sector. For this reason, we achieved a score of 5 points of 10. The next one, research of development funding. The goal of this sub-indicator is detect trends in the growth and source of funding for research and development in the country. This growth in research is a sign of healthy knowledge economy. Find it. Mexico dedicates 2.6 or 0.26 and 0.15 of its growth development product research, in contrast with the global average that is of the 2.04 of the global development product. Gross domestic expenditure on research is carried mainly by government in 80%, while the private sector only participates with 20%. The National Council of Science and Technology, CONACYT, brings together 368 members from different sectors of science and technology, and it also grants scholarship for postgraduate study. Conclusion, the government spent between 3 billion and 5 billion on research and development. For the reason, we achieve a score of 5 of a total of 10. The digital economy, the goal of this sub-indicator is to see the integration of digital technology, cloud service, by network, etc., in the country's economy. The finding is that we have a National Directorate of a Digital Strategy that is responsible for preparing and implementing the country digitalization policies. The Ministry of Economy is responsible for implementing the development of the software industry innovation. And for example, McKinsey company ranks Mexico in the 55 in digital maturity out of 151 countries. Conclusion, the country's digital economy has been rapidly growing in the last 5 years. We achieved a score of 6 points of a total of 10. And the next category, we can be operational and technical capability. This subdimension checks country's national IP system and cybersecurity resilience. This is related to analyze that states that possess regulation, organizational means, and informing capabilities can be better protected from IP theft. What we can analyze in this dimension? For example, we have therefore indicate political environment that it's subdivided in good governance. How say the indicator of good governance? The goal of this measure is to study the quality of governance in the country, stable political environment, less corrupt and more transparent, are most resilient. We know that Mexico have a lot of trouble related with corruption issues, but we have some different strengths and different weaknesses. In this case, the conclusion is Mexico can withstand some political, economic, and security shock. Public perception of corruption are high, and we have limited public trust in institutions. For this reason, we achieve a score of 3 points of a total of 10. The next sub-indicator is related with IP government and performance. We can see here in IP intellectual property awareness society, the goal of this dimension is analyze the state of IP awareness within Mexican society. This is related with, for example, the habits related to piracy consumption in Mexico. The National Geography and Statistics Institute in our country analyzed this through different surveys, and the conclusion is that a strong public, media, and private sector debate on IP issues, or population, or different companies, firms, and media doesn't have a very good awareness related to IP protection, and someone consume these different products. For the reason, we achieve a score of 8 points of a total of 10. The next one, it's related with the part of intellectual property awareness, industry and research institution. The goal of these indicators is examine the state of IP awareness among key stakeholders, mainly industry and research institutions, where new goods, processes, and knowledge are regularly produced. The findings to the IP data during present that as a good culture related with promotion, IP rights, intellectual property, encourage with different economic association like Coparmex, and the conclusion is that we have good awareness and active debate among industry professionals related with IP theft. The next one is intellectual property regulation and enforcement. This indication have the goal to examine the breadth and depth of legislation and government policy on IP protection. We have a copyright and industrial protection legislation in the federal level of government. We have institutions that attend these different aspects. For example, we have an administrative code related with IP matters that attend more than 30,000 lawsuits related with IP protection. The conclusion that we have a strong legal framework exists, but they are partially implemented. For the reason, we achieve a score that for 8 points of a total of 10. The next one, international property governance. The goal of this dimension is check the organizational structure of the authorities that regulate and enforce IP laws. The conclusion is that policy frameworks and organization structure exist, but implementation is apparent. We can enforce this dimension, and we can use more of legal framework related with IP protection. For the reason, we achieve a dimension of 6 points of a total of 10. In next case, intellectual property and international diplomacy. The goal of this dimension is to scan how often IP matters are delivered by the country in international setting, bilateral and multilaterality. The dimension of this related with some studies of World Intellectual Property Organization, the WIPO, and the Locarno Agreement of the Classification of Data Science presents that our country has signed most major international agreement on IP, and some are ratified by the Senate or the legislative power, Mexico. Related with cybersecurity issues, that is the sixth indicator. We have 6 subdivisions that we present right now. For example, we use the indicator of cybersecurity awareness society. The goal of this measure is to measure the cybersecurity literacy in society. And for example, related with some study of the Mexican Association of Internet, we can see that 50 users consider electronic devices are not protected against internet risks. 22% of users indicates being a victim of some cyber vulnerability, may lose information. Cyber habits achieve 3.4 of people never update their antimalware software. 32.8 of users use malware manager. 59.2 of users not know what is or do not use a second authenticity factor. Conclusion, very strong public, media, and private sector debate on cybersecurity. For the reason, we achieve a score of 7 points of a total of 10. In the dimension related with cybersecurity and awareness, industry and research institution, the goal of this is examine the state of cybersecurity awareness among key stakeholders. We have some studies related with private sector and cybersecurity issues, and the conclusion is that we have a strong private sector debate on cybersecurity and state engagement with the key stakeholder. For this reason, we achieve a score of 9 points of a total of 10. The next one, cybersecurity regulation and enforcement, examines the legislation regarding unauthorized access and misuse of computer system. We can see that we have important debates related with cybersecurity regulation. We have 12 legislative proposals related with cybersecurity law. We have, the country have a national cybersecurity strategy of the 2017, and we have a scientific police that it will create in the federal police, and right now it's a part of the national guard. The conclusion is a few laws exist without implementation in that country, and for the reason we achieve 3 points of total of 10. Cybersecurity governments analyze the quality of cyber governance, focusing on clear organizational structures, clear enforcement mechanisms, and interagency coordination. There is no document, legislation, or national strategy that presents the delimitation of responsibilities in terms of cybersecurity governance. The National Cybersecurity Strategy of 2017 was criticized for not establishing how the policy will be implemented, and the incidence of institutional documents closely related to cybersecurity governance is common, but they don't functionally join. National Artificial Intelligence Strategy for 2018, National Digital Strategy for 2021, Institutional Strategy for Cyberspace for CEMAR. Is other case that doesn't works with other documents related with cyber political national strategy. The conclusion is we have a basic organizational structure, mainly technical and poor cooperation. We achieve a score of 3 of a total of 10. Cybersecurity in international diplomacy is related to see how often cybersecurity matters are deliberated by country in international sector. Findings, more activities in global cybersecurity initiatives that has a bit transformed international policy, participated in the preparation of the comprehensive study on cybercrime of the 22 Vienna Summit. For example, in 2022, the Mexican Foreign Ministry hosted the event named Cyber Diplomacy and Stability in Latin America and the Caribbean, making the moment last, that it was organized by the Mexican Chancellor. The National Cybersecurity Index gives the score of 17 points out of 10 of global contribution to cybersecurity. Conclusion, minimal international engagement on cybersecurity, mainly technical matters. And the last category, category D, related to foreign cooperation, we study the nature and extent of the country political, economic, and scientific relation with China and OECD economies. What says the information related with Mexico in the Indicator 7, foreign relation with China? It's subdivided in these 4 sub-indicator. We can analyze political security relation. The goal of this is analyzing the existence of a strong political relation between China that will result in a vulnerable environment to ITIF. Finally, Mexico and China diplomatic relations have 42 years. China is Mexico's second largest trading partner in the in international commerce. Now the bilateral cooperation agenda, even related IP, the proximity of Mexico to the United States prevent it from getting close to China. Conclusion, normal diplomatic relation with few channel and linkage. For the reason, we achieve a score of 3 points of a total of 10. In economic cooperation, examine the depth of the economic relation with China. Bilateral trade between Mexico and China amounted to $110 billion in 2021. China exported $83 billion to Mexico. During the last year, export from China to Mexico have increased annually 23%. Mexico exported $9 billion to China, and China is Mexico's second largest economy partner. Conclusion, good trade relation. China among the top of the 5 largest investors of our country. China's commercial ICT presence detect the footprint of Chinese information and computer technology companies in Mexico. In 2002, China Unicum obtained a concession title to market telecommunication service in Mexico for a 30-year period, developed its own national fiber optic infrastructure. How we present a company that have invested more than $500 million in the last 6 years in the country. Conclusion, China ICT companies are major players in the telecom equipment and smartphone market. And in scientific cooperation, we can see the goal of this dimension is check to state scientific cooperation with China by assessing scientific research agreement. In 2013, China and Mexico established a complex strategic association to strengthen bilateral cooperation in education, science, and technology, program for exchange of students, professors, and researchers, the scholarship for students to study a bachelor's, master, doctorate, or language in Chinese and Mexican university. Conclusion, we have multiplex cooperation arrangement between the country universities and Chinese university, along with investment in research from China side. The last dimension in relation with OECD member states, it's related with economic cooperation and scientific cooperation. We can see that the economic cooperation, the goal of this indicator is to analyze the depth of economic relation between OECD member states. The finding is that Mexico keeps close relation with the OECD countries through its 14th Free Trade Agreement. Main economic partners are USA and Canada, the Economic Association, Political Coordination, and Cooperation Agreement with the European Union that allow it to establish relation with the 2017 nation of this international organization, and since 2005, Mexico and Japan have an economic association agreement. Conclusion, we have a strong trade relation with many OECD economies. We achieve a score of A of a total of 10. And finally, with scientific cooperation, the goal of this dimension is to examine the state of scientific cooperation with OECD countries. Finally, through the International Development Cooperation Law, Mexico created an International Development Cooperation Program and the Mexican Agency for International Development Cooperation, creating a triangular cooperation scheme, especially with countries such as Germany, Japan, Spain, and Chile. MEXIS has an offer of 48 academic exchange programs and promoting of scientific research in 20 OECD countries. Conclusion, there are some cooperative arrangements between major research institutions, universities, and companies. That's all for me. I try to reduce the most that I have, URMIKA, but we present the results related of the India study. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Manuel and Nigel, for your insights. I too will resort to our framework, but will broadly cover them instead of going into the depths. I'll just start sharing it. So when it comes to India, I'll also look at all three categories. First, looking at the nature of Indian economy, just some key facts. What we can see is India is an upcoming knowledge economy. As we can see that the number of patents have increased 7 times between 2011 to 2021. India has also jumped ranks on World Intellectual Property's Global Innovation Index from 81 in 2015 to 40th in 132. And if we look at the graph on the right-hand side, India lies above the line, which basically says that India enjoys an increasing returns to scale when it comes to innovation. That is, for a given level of innovation input or investment, it will always produce more than what amount of innovation input that we've introduced. So when it comes to innovation, it has a favorable position. And then if we look at foreign relations with China and OECD countries, when we look at political security ties with China, it has deteriorated since the Galwan border conflict in 2020, and bilateral ties have never really gotten back to normal ever since. But when we look at economic cooperation with China, India actually experiences an asymmetrical trade relation wherein it actually imports more from China than exports. That is, it has a trade deficit. And also, even though after the Galwan conflict, the Indian government banned number of Chinese apps, over 300 Chinese apps, and also eliminated 5G and ZTE from its 5G suppliers such as Huawei and ZTE from its from supplying 5G to Indian market. There is a strong ICT presence. In fact, 80% of smartphones that were sold last year were Chinese made. So India, having realized this relationship where one side it has deteriorating political security ties, on the other hand, it has increased dependency on Chinese products, it is looking to diversify trade relations with other countries. So for instance, India-US bilateral trade increased by 48% in 2021 compared to 2020. And moreover, the recent India-US cooperation on several fronts, including defense industrial cooperation, semiconductor supply chains, then we also have telecoms and scientific cooperation is only going to demonstrate deepening ties with other countries. India also enjoys high-tech and scientific cooperation with other OECD countries, as well as such as Lithuania. And some of its top FDI investors in India are actually OECD countries such as US, Netherlands, Japan, UK, and Germany. So with this, we can see that it is realizing its relation with China and does not want to depend on China too much when it comes to economic relations. And therefore, it is looking to diversify trade with like other OECD countries and increase its cooperation. Now, quickly looking at India's cybersecurity and IP maturity. So when it comes to innovation and domestic capabilities, India has introduced a number of initiatives such as Make in India, Startup India, production-linked incentive schemes to basically boost domestic production and innovation across various sectors, including high-tech manufacturing, electronic goods, and pharmaceuticals. As a result, there has been an increase in the number of startups between 2016 and 2022. And also there have been some reforms in the national IPR policy. For instance, there has been a reduction in the fee for applying for patents. And this has actually resulted in an increase in the percentage of domestic residents, Indian residents who are applying for patents. As we can see, it has increased from 20% in 2010 to around 40% in 2020. Now, when we look at cybersecurity environment, there has been a massive increase in the number of suspected state-sponsored Chinese operations targeting Indian organizations and companies. As we can see, it was a 261% increase in just about a year between 2020 and 2021. One of classic examples of cyber-espionage was this IP theft, which was basically a Chinese state-sponsored hacker group was accused of stealing information pertaining to vaccine research from Bharat Biotech and Serum Institute of India, which are top 2 pharmaceutical companies. So it was accused of stealing this research and with the aim of gaining competitive advantage and bridging its scientific gap. So having realized its this growing cyber threat, India has introduced a number of reforms, and I would just like to highlight maybe one or two, and one of them being the National Cybersecurity Strategy for 2023 has actually identified 7 sectors as being critical to the nation's growth, and it expects to provide guidance, like a structured guidance when it comes to cybersecurity in these sectors. Besides that, we also have the Digital India Bill, which is expected to replace our IT Act of 2000, and it has classified intermediaries across the digital spectrum into, say, OTT, gaming, e-commerce, so on and so forth. It basically wants to provide regulated, like tailored regulations to these intermediaries based on their size and the risk that they entail. So having said this, I really literally wrapped it up in like a couple of sentences, but what coming to the main point is that from these initiatives and announcements and programs, we see that there is government will, but it lacks capability. That is, there are concerns when it comes to the implementation mechanisms. As you also mentioned, Juan Manuel, that you do have a lot of initiatives, but when it comes to implementation, it is poor implementation. When it comes to cooperation, there's poor cooperation. So this is something I think we are seeing across emerging economies in general. So for instance, in India, India's first national cybersecurity policy that was formulated in 2013 has not been implemented yet. And after 10 years, we are only coming up with an update on the existing policy. And this does not actually guarantee any tangible improvements in the cyber environment. After all, this is only a framework which comprises of best practices. It does not come with any legal consequences or penal consequences. So it's up to the sectors, it's up to the organizations to actually follow these guidelines and adopt these best practices. But this does not mean that we will actually have a significant improvement in the cybersecurity environment. Even after so many attacks that India has been facing in the past couple of years, India still lacks a national cybersecurity law or a dedicated ministry. Moreover, there is lack of coordination between these government and private sector and other intergovernmental agencies due to differences in priorities and competencies. What happens is there are different initiatives, different programs launched under different ministries. There could be overlap of responsibilities, no clear division of responsibilities, which in turn results in poor enforcement mechanisms. Also, there are regulatory gaps, and more often than not, in Indian cybersecurity, regulations are more defensive than offensive. That is, they would focus on how to defend themselves or how to report when there's a data breach, rather than actually providing companies and training individuals and providing them guidelines or standard operating procedures on how to adopt security measures. What is it that they need to do to protect their data system, rather than once breached or once attacked, how to respond. So these were a couple of areas, basically implementation, enforcement, coordination, which India lacks. Oftentimes the announcements just are on paper. The initiatives just remain on paper. So the will exists, but the capability is some sort missing. So if we look at a snapshot, what we can see is how vulnerable and resilient is India to the threat of economic cyber espionage. When it comes to vulnerability, it is moderately vulnerable because, as we said, it is an upcoming knowledge economy. It has deepening ties with other economies, and as well as there's a steady increase in the knowledge production, as we saw from the number of startups and the number of patents that have been granted and filed for over the past 10 years or couple of years. Then when it comes to degree of resilience, India has relatively low resilience. And this is because even though it has extensive IP regulations and reforms being made when it comes to intellectual property, as well as a number of initiatives when it comes to cybersecurity, when it comes to actually enforcing them, implementing them on ground, there's poor enforcement, poor implementation. And so with this, I would like to say that what is it that India can actually do to protect itself against this very unique threat? And not just India, even other emerging economies, such as Mexico, which is actually facing this problem of, say, even lack of resources. When more often than not, what we've come across is that emerging economies in Global South have complained that they do not have enough resources to actually build these cybersecurity capabilities. So one of the ways to actually first start is identify sectors or industries that are IP relevant. And by IP relevant or IP intensive, I do not mean sectors that are just applying for patents or copyrights or industrial designs, but also sectors that are highly innovative, but at the same time productive, and are also receiving a lot of foreign investment or domestic investment, because these sectors in general are crucial for an economy's growth. And it is important that we need to protect these systems as we are incorporating digitalization across all our business activities. And so one of the first steps could be actually identifying those sectors and then prioritizing the allocation of government resources towards those sectors. It could be your energy sector, given that nowadays with having climate and climate sustainable goals in mind, a lot of emerging economies are actually investing in green energy. It could range from smart grids, it could range from solar panels, and also be it could also extend to, say, electric vehicles, for instance. So it is important that even though you might see energy as a critical infrastructure, but at the same time, it is also being extremely innovative. And there might be players in that field which are producing new products or designing new products that need to be protected. Secondly, something this is particular to India, I'm not sure about other emerging economies, is that one could introduce utility models in its IP policy. And by utility models, I mean, these are models which basically provide protection to innovations on existing products. So small countries and small firms in those countries may not necessarily have the capability to build a product from scratch or innovate something from scratch, and therefore they might just produce some advancement on existing products. And by introducing utility models, it is just a way to protect those advancements, and therefore also you can in that way promote and encourage small firms to innovate. Another way this also addresses the problem of lack of resources or limited resources, and that could be to establish a sovereign wealth fund. Now, what do we mean by a sovereign wealth fund? It basically refers to a percentage of, say, government's budget or existing wealth funds that are given to companies that have been identified as IP intensive or highly innovative. You could first, for instance, once you identify the sectors or industries that are IP intensive, you could then look into what companies are in those sectors are producing the most high quality IP, or based on market capitalization or profits that they've derived. You could have these certain criterias to judge which of these companies are actually key to promoting growth and innovation, and then allocate a certain percentage of government budget to these companies that they can use to install cybersecurity capabilities. That way, they do not have to think about paying for it out of their own pockets and out of their own profits, but it is more like just a grant being given by the government that you can use to actually install these capabilities within your organization. Of course, this would require a lot of monitoring because you would not want the money to be used for something else. Another thing that you could do to actually encourage countries to basically raise awareness and solve this problem of coordination is basically hold these kinds of dialogues, the one that we are today, like a webinar where we have people from different countries sitting here and learning about this topic. You can also hold multi-stakeholder engagement across different government departments, have the key industry players sitting in the same room, organize these workshops and raise awareness about this topic. Like Nigel mentioned, that this was surely the countries did commit to or made an agreement of some sorts to not enable or support this norm, but it has fallen off the radar. It has not been really spoken about or given enough importance ever since 2015 or 2016. And it is important that the threats are rising. China, being one of the most prominent actor in this field, is becoming more and more powerful when it comes to just attacking other countries and stealing data, using it for its own commercial advantages and gaining competitive advantage. It is important that we hold these workshops and dialogues and encourage, in a way, countries to reaffirm and readopt this norm. So this was my very brief presentation. Hopefully I was able to provide a bit of India's stance on its, where India stands on the resilience and vulnerability framework, but happy to take questions from the audience.
Thank you, URMIKA. Very interesting related from Latin America, we see India like a medium nation with a very, very interesting growth development product that is growing every year. And for example, that we know right now that it's a giant of the emerging technologies, that it could be a part in a very, very important part of the next years in this struggle between the United States and China, and to be a strategic partner with our countries of the South Asia and the Latin America. I have 3 questions to start the Q&A session. And the first question is for Nigel. Nigel, we have a question for you. That's from what you see in relation to the US, what would you say that is one of the biggest weaknesses from the US in trying to stop address IP theft? What do you believe that is the more weaknesses?
I think one of the biggest weaknesses in the US response is in galvanizing a greater collective response, because unless the United States is able to raise collective defenses and collective punishment of states and players involved in cyber-enabled cyber theft, it will continue unabated. And so because the threat is far broader than just the United States. As I initially mentioned, that these actors will go after the second or third sort of most competitive or innovative firms in the sector and target them regardless of where they are. And so unless the United States is able to encourage its like-minded trading partners across the Asia Pacific, Europe and elsewhere, that like, hey, this is a major issue, we're all affected by it, we all need to do more about it, so that there's a collective sort of effort to respond, because otherwise it's this basically the world's worst game of whack-a-mole in terms of boosting enforcement, boosting prosecutions, more funding, more staff, more investigations. But as long as the fact that cyber theft remains as prevalent as it does is evidence of the fact that it's as successful and valuable as it is. And so until there's greater collective prosecutions to raise the cost of it, it will continue largely unaffected. And so I think there still needs to be much more that countries do together on this issue, hopefully after they recognize they all face a similar threat.
That's very interesting, Nigel, because this condition of the ubiquity of the internet of cyberspace present us as a domain without legislation, without international laws, and this condition doesn't permit to accredit IPDF, for example, a cyber attack. It's very interesting how Mandiant, that is this company related with cybersecurity issues, have maybe 20 or 40 APTs, advanced persistent threats, related with Chinese cyber commands. And we have a lot of problems to prove that these commands attack different important industries and high-tech companies in the United States. And it's a very important because when we analyze the differences between the Russia cyber attacks and the Chinese cyber attacks, we see that Chinese cyber attacks are focused in IP theft, are focused in intellectual property, are focused in get information of these biggest companies as Google, as Facebook, Apple, and that's a very problem from for these companies and for the economic development of the USA. And that's very interesting. It's very different for US cyber attacks profile that is related with political information, national security, and intelligence information. And that show us a different strategy that have the two countries, the strategy to use the cyberspace for a leadership in the 20th century of Russia or China are very different, but we know that China have more interest in IP and IP issues, and that's very interesting fact. Thank you, Nigel. That's a very important point. I have a question for for the three panelists or speakers that say the next one is general. Maybe we can start with URMIKA. It will be a pleasure. Is there sufficient interest within the international community combat the threat of economic cyber-espionage? How can we prevent this from being a West versus China issue? What do you believe, URMIKA?
Sorry, I couldn't understand the second question.
The second question, how can we prevent this from a struggle of the West versus China issue?
So when it comes to awareness about this topic in international domain, I think that is the problem we are facing, that there is not enough attention given to this issue at this point of time. I think it also goes back to the fact that this is a very specific cyber crime that we are addressing over here. When it comes to cyber threats, people look at ransomware and data theft and just basic phishing and scam and things like that. But when it comes to when you talk to somebody and you say that, oh, what do you know what economic cyber-espionage is? Probably they don't. What is intellectual property theft committed by cyber means? They wouldn't probably know. So I think even though we thought that given China's increasing like activities in this domain, countries would acknowledge this, that it is a growing threat. I do not think at this point of time there is enough awareness or recognition of this threat. I think this is what we are trying with our capacity building initiative, where we are actually even going to these countries and holding engagements with industry and government experts in those countries to actually make them aware of what this issue is and why is it important for their economy. And given that the fact that they have strong supply chain linkages. So for instance, a company in Indonesia will have strong supply chain linkages with a company of the US, and they have set up their company in that particular country, and now they're using their means and they're developing a product. But if their resilience mechanism is not strong, a state-sponsored hacker group can easily target and steal that information for their own domestic industries. So I hope that through this webinar, through such engagements, we'll actually be able to we'll actually use this issue in the domain, and people can readopt and reaffirm this norm.
Okay, that's very interesting. What do you believe, Nigel, related? The international community have the no interest in IP theft issues, or that what you believe that it can improve this situation?
Me? Was that question directed to me? Sorry.
The question I read again for you. It's the next one. Is there sufficient interest within the international community to combat the threat of economic cyber-espionage? And how we can avoid a struggle between the West versus China?
I think there's growing interest in cybersecurity writ large amongst like-minded countries in and around the United States, but it's largely animated, I think, in relation to the cybersecurity of critical infrastructure, and stemming from that with cloud cybersecurity and cybersecurity of the cybersecurity issues relating to new technologies like quantum. But I think as a part of that, that provides an opening to revise our policymakers' thoughts on this issue of the commercial aspect of it. Because as more countries and more firms focus specifically on critical and new technologies, they will be paying more attention to, well, if our firms are successful in developing these technologies, what's to stop some state-sponsored actor from stealing all of their hard work into it? And so I think there's an opening here to sort of refresh the discussion of this issue on the agenda between policymakers. Largely at the moment, to your earlier point, the discussion is largely animated about sort of like military intelligence, strategic type espionage, as opposed to the commercial aspect of it. But I think they obviously involve a lot of the same actors. And in many regards, we already have many of the tools we need for it, but it's a matter of sort of broadening the engagement, providing use cases and demonstrating best practices in terms of laws and regulations and such, to help more policymakers for more country understand that as they think about cybersecurity and critical infrastructure and such, that they also need to think about cybersecurity as it relates to this critical commercial issue.
Thank you, Nigel. That's very interesting because I believe that there is a important asymmetries between development and not developing countries. For example, in Latin America, we have a lot of absence of national legislation related with cybersecurity issues. Sometimes we have more preoccupant problems related like poverty, corruption, violence, and when we don't resolve these national preoccupation, national problems, we don't have the chance to bring the importation to the IPDF issues in the international context. And I believe that it's very, very interesting. An institution like ASPI, like ITIF, promote these debates in the policymaker of our countries. I have a country for URMIKA. Can you talk a bit more about the current nature of the cyber security enforcement in India? For example, we saw that in Mexico, less than 5 of cyber crimes are investigated, which is the case from India law-wise.
I'm sorry, I don't really have the stats on that, but there is a general enforcement problem when it comes to basic cybersecurity initiatives. When it comes to cybersecurity governance, I think India is still doing well. But again, I think it ranges from the fact, how do you judge how good it is, unless and until it is actually addressing all its problems. So I don't really have the exact value like you had for Mexico. I need to go back to my report and see. But what we've generally noticed is that law enforcement agencies don't really interact with each other. And also there is like there are differences in their responsibilities. So even if there is an attack, I think the recent, in fact, in the Digital India Bill of 2023, they have said that you need to report a breach within 6 hours, or you will have a penal, there'll be a penal consequence, that you'll have to pay a fee or there'll be a penalty. So, but to what extent will this actually improve the cybersecurity environment is yet to be seen. But when it comes to other initiatives like the national cybersecurity policy that I just mentioned, that it is basically just an upgradation on the existing one. They do understand it, that these are our critical sectors that we need to protect, but what are they doing about it? They're not really going and enforcing it. So every department, I think there was this another one, that is the National Cybercrime Coordination Center, which was established, but there were problems about its surveillance and privacy and how it's maintaining the data of the citizens. So I think half of the times there are just so many problems pertaining to the structure of the initiatives or the programs that are being launched, that it ultimately doesn't even go into enforcement. They don't even implement it. They don't have the right mechanism to implement, or the right division in the ministry to allocate like who's supposed to do what. So that is where the enforcement problem lies. But of course, when it comes to defensive, there is sure a number of different laws that you should do this, you must report. The police will go and they will identify and they will report and investigate the problem, but I'm not sure how far that is actually happening.
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting. And there is 6 institutions that collect the law-wise related with cyber crimes in India.
Sorry, can you please repeat?
There is an institution that collect or attend the cybercrime demands in India right now.
So yes, like I mentioned, there are a couple of different like initiatives that have been launched. So I have actually written it down. So there's one that I mentioned, the National Cyber Coordination Center, that was actually launched to scan this internet traffic and entering the country to curtail real-time cybersecurity threats, but it was under the ministry. It's under the Ministry of Information Technology. It's basically India's computer emergency response team. It has been set under that, but again, due to surveillance problems, it has not ever really been very effective in curtailing this cybersecurity problem, as we have seen by the increasing number of cases. And recently, the Indian Cybercrime Coordination Center was also set up under the Ministry of Home Affairs, which is actually responsible for coordinating the cybersecurity in India. And it has a number of different sub-departments underneath, referring to threat analysis, as well as research and development and cybersecurity coordination. And it only launched in 2020, as far as I remember. So to some extent, it has just started. So we don't really know how effective that is, but the ban on Chinese apps that happened after the border conflict in 2020 was actually initiated by this department. And it recognized the issues around data theft and privacy and reported, and around 59 apps were immediately banned from India. So these are the two, like I would say, agencies or initiatives that has been undertaken, but again, it lies under different ministries, which again goes on to demonstrate the lack of coordination problem and lack of like just communication between the two departments, who's supposed to do what.
Okay. I believe that all countries have a problem with communication related with cybersecurity issues, more than countries like Mexico that doesn't have delimited the responsibilities of each institution in the cybersecurity system.
Yeah, we still don't have a dedicated cybersecurity ministry either. These are just different initiatives that are being implemented, that are being introduced by different ministries of the government. So I think there is a need that we actually collate all of them, we bring them all together. And actually, it's better to have one ministry that is responsible for all these initiatives. Then it will be there's this clear division of responsibilities. And I think that will be more easier rather than having these different departments, different responsibilities. It just goes on to reinforce a more fragmented structure in the system.
Thank you, URMIKA. Very, very interesting. I want to close with this question for the three speakers. How can we make our countries take the issue of IPDF more seriously, especially given that they face much more pressing cybersecurity issues. I believe that in United States, cybersecurity issues, IPDF, they are a priority of the government. They understand a lot. I believe in maybe India and Mexico, or maybe India have more awareness related with these issues. But in the case in Mexico, I will be the first of answer. We have a progress related that in Latin America countries, we don't have state policies or state policy projects. We have government policies, and that's a real problem because some governments, for example, some administration of different presidents, in the case of Mexico, have interesting ideas related to building policy institutions related with cybersecurity issues. But when we have a change of government, we have a change of the president for another one. The new president destroy, change all the last policy or the policy of the old government and build a new policy of his government. And this is a very preoccupant problem related that the cyber threats, the context of cybersecurity evolve or have an evolution that our country doesn't have face. And that's a very problem because cybercrime are growing, cybercrime is in evolution, and we don't have an institution that it will be a building trajectory in the time to face these different threats. It's the position that I have related with Mexico. I want to hear NIGEL, we cross with this participation, and we hear URMIKA, and this is the last question that we can attend. Please, NIGEL.
Yeah, no, three specific things come to mind in terms of how do we encourage policymakers and I suppose the broader business community to sort of refocus on this issue. The first is improving both opportunities for and the lines of communication between public and private actors, so that there's greater information sharing between the government and firms about what are they experiencing, what are they seeing, and what's the impact, and managing that in a way that where the information is treated confidentially, so that both sides can learn from each other, given their respective role in this, about the extent and the nature of the challenge as it relates to the cyber theft of IP. Secondly, where there are prosecutions and investigations and such, the government should publicize those. And you've seen there's been a steady tempo of media articles in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and such about major investigations involving high-profile attempts or thefts of IP from Chinese actors involving major US firms. And because those media articles send a signal to the rest of the business community of like, oh, if Boeing is being targeted, if GE is being targeted, then I may well be targeted as well, and I need to sort of look into this. And so that publicity about local cases helps encourage sort of engagement on it. And the third and final idea is holding specific government hearings on the nature of the threat, calling on the business community to come forward and provide submissions and data and stories and case examples of like what exactly are they seeing in these different countries, so that policymakers have more data and better information about, so when they come to us and asking for this is real, this is happening, this is occurring and happening to our firms, not just US firms or British firms or whatever it may be, but like local firms. And so hearings by respective sort of parliamentary bodies are a good opportunity again to sort of draw out that information that policymakers can then use to motivate further discussions and policy proposals.
Thank you, NIGEL, for your answer. And we cross with you, URMIKA.
Thank you. I think I also have similar thoughts on this. I think the one thing to do in India is to basically hold these engagements, workshops and dialogues where you have both government and industry experts, the key stakeholders in the room, to raise awareness, because surely there is a growing recognition of the cyber threat landscape. They know that there has been increasing number of activities, but just to draw their attention to this particular threat, it is important to actually make them aware. I don't think a lot of people actually in the leadership as well know what this threat is in a great depth. So I think one way would be to actually have these engagements. Secondly, it should start at the school level. We should have like just basic cybersecurity curriculums incorporated. We already have hackathons and other competitions to foster cybersecurity awareness among students and the youth. Another thing that they could actually do is have like cybersecurity clinics, where basically university students go to small companies and teach them about cyber hygiene and foster cyber hygiene. So I think it starts from the scratch, like you need to know why cybersecurity is important and then slowly address the different threats. So I think, and also like basically just publicize in the media. So maybe just write news articles. We have our podcast series. This is like a small plug-in. Please just plug in, listen to it. We have experts. We have had Nigel as well talk on this topic. So you could listen to podcasts on this and learn. You could read articles. So maybe just write. So I think these are the only 3 things that comes to my mind, to basically just raise awareness first about why is it so important, and then go on to implement the measures to how to build security and how to build protection.
Thank you, URMIKA. Create this awareness related with events like this, to have the opportunity to have this discussion, these debates with us. It will be a pleasure. I want to grant you, URMIKA, I want to grant you, Nigel, for participating in this webinar, and it will be a pleasure. I hope that we have another chance to discuss cybersecurity and ITIF issues, and it will be a pleasure to stay with 8 of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Muchas gracias a los que nos acompañaron. Thank you for all that joined us with this webinar. It will be a pleasure.